Exodus 33. Exodus chapter 33. It's got three main divisions. It's time to leave, temporary tabernacle, and talking with God. And Exodus chapter 33, Exodus chapter 32, the last chapter that we were in. Does anybody remember what happened in Exodus chapter 32? Anybody remember what happened in Exodus chapter 32, the previous chapter? It's good. That's good. It's a good thing. What had happened was the people had made an idol and worshipped it. Okay? And then God, through Moses actually judged the people. And so this is immediately after. Okay? So, everybody feeling okay?
Yeah. Are you okay?
I'm fantastic. Thank you very much for asking. Yeah. Anybody feeling like this is really awkward? Anybody? Anybody feeling like this is totally normal?
Now you made it weird.
Okay.
Yeah, I was supposed to say, now you're just going to make it weird.
Yeah. I made it weird?
Yeah.
Yeah, you made it weird.
Because you're
I'm talking, asking questions. You guys aren't answering. Who's making it weird?
No, it's only awkward if you make it awkward, though.
I know, and I love making it awkward.
Me too.
I love making it awkward. And what I shared with first service was, this is on purpose, by the way. What I shared with first service is that I've been at here at Revival for about 3 years now, and one of the things that changed, there's some things that changed from the previous youth group that I was at, and the way that I was operating. One of the big things that changed was I cut down on my awkwardness. I have learned over the years that I really, really like to be in awkward situations. And what I mean by that is this. I really like to make people feel awkward and then just watch them squirm. That's a fun thing for me. Now, part of that, much of that, is just because my brain just works that way. But the other part of it is that I'm a dad. And you know how dads can be awkward sometimes, right? Yeah? How many of you have a dad that can be awkward? This is just kind of awkward. Sometimes says things or does things, and your friends are around or whatever. It's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you did that. Or you're FaceTiming with your friend, and then your dad wants to come and like, hey, what's up? What's going on? Or whatever. I love those kinds of things. Now, I don't normally try to embarrass my own kids, but there's just times when I like to make things awkward. And I've really tried to cut back on that because at the previous church that I was at, the previous youth group, I used to do it all the time. And I think it was too much, but it was a heck of a lot of fun. Okay? And so I've tried to cut back on that here, not be as awkward, but every once in a while, throw some of that out. But there's a reason for all of this. What in the world does this have to do with Exodus 33? Well, being a dad, there have been lots and lots and lots and lots, countless times that I have had to correct my kids. Okay? And to have awkward conversations. And I'm just the king of awkward conversations. I grew up with a mom and a dad and then 2 sisters. So, and now I've got obviously a wife and I've got 3 girls and 1 boy. So girl issues, I ain't got a problem. Heard it all. Heard things I never wanted to hear. And now I know about, not a big deal. I can bring those things up. Guy issues, obviously, not a big deal. I can bring those things up. And, my son will just say, man, you're so awkward. And it's like, yeah, I know. Let's talk about it. And so I've just realized over the years, being a dad, that that's part of my job. I have to bring up some of those awkward conversations. Sometimes when things have gone wrong, and it happens in my family. I'm a pastor, but still, I've got normal kids, and they've got a normal dad, and there's just times when it's time to raise the bar again. Like the standards have dropped, and it's time to bring them back up, and corrections need to be made, and I bring those things up, and I realize that I have to. Sometimes I just have to bring that stuff up. I can't just let things slide. And then there's always after. You know, when you have been corrected for something, or you've been caught doing something, or you've had a problem with a parent or a teacher or a coach or whoever it might be, and then they have to correct you, there's always the afterward, and it's always so awkward, where you're not sure, like, oh man, are we still, it's like, should I just leave now? Or we're kind of like, well, I don't really know. Like, next time I see him, what am I going to say? I don't really want to see him because then if I see him, what am I going to say? And how am I going to handle it? And what are they going to think? And there's just all of those questions, all of those worries. And God is a heavenly what? Does anybody remember what he is? A heavenly Father. And he's got a whole mess of disobedient kids that he has to correct often. And what we see in Exodus 33 is after the correction. And is it going to be awkward? And you'll sense this awkwardness on behalf of the people. It's like, I don't know, God, where are we at? But you'll notice that what God does is that he just moves on. And there are some lingering consequences from what they did back in Exodus 32, worshiping the idol. There are some consequences. But you'll see that God has not changed, nor has his love for his people changed. And it's a beautiful picture. There are three main divisions which I put up already and moved through them quickly. But let's jump into the first one here. Beginning at verse 1, we see that it is time to leave, God tells Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt. Okay. Now, does anybody remember where they are at right now? Where God's telling them, okay, leave this place. Does anybody remember the name of the place that they're at? Sinai. Yes, they're at Sinai, the wilderness of Sinai, and he tells them, okay, it's time for you to go, and you and the people who remember that little kind of like back and forth that God had with Moses back in chapter 32, like, these are your people. Yes, I know, God, but these are your people, and they were kind of throwing the people back and forth, like, yeah, these disobedient people, these are yours. Actually, they're yours, God. And they were back and forth. Notice in verse 1, depart and go up from here. God tells Moses, you and the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt. God's like, hey, it's time to go, and you got to take those people with you that you brought out of Egypt. It's almost like God's just kind of like, these are disobedient people, and they're yours, Moses. But notice this in verse 1, and the second part, he says, where are they supposed to go? To the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it. So it's the promise of possession. What does that mean? Like, what's going on? What God is telling them is, God's speaking to Moses, and Moses is responsible for speaking to the people. He's saying, listen, it's time to go. It's time to move on toward the promised land. I promised the land to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to the Jews, the Israelites. I promised you that land. And what God is indicating to Moses is nothing about that promise has changed. You still get the promise. But wait, we sacrificed, or we worshipped an idol. We totally disregarded you, disobeyed you. God says, yeah, but my promise to you hasn't changed. God's love toward his people has not changed. My kids, my own kids, speaking personally, may get angry at me, but my love for them has not changed. I recently had to deal with a correction in my family with one of my kids. And I started out by saying, what happened does not change my love for you. And at the end of it, it's, I love you. And I've done this to my kids before too, at the end of a disagreement, or, where I've had to correct them. I've reminded them, listen, this hasn't changed the way I feel about you. I still love you. I'm still crazy about you. I still love you. And then I'll do this. Look how awkward. Imagine being my kid, my poor kids. I'll say, do you love me? And they'll go, yeah. And I'll say, well, you need to tell me. And you can see the look on their face. It's like, man, you just finished yelling at me. They're not saying that, but the expression on their face is like, and I'll say, you need to tell me. I'm not leaving until you tell me. Because my point is this. Okay, it was corrected. Now let's move on. I don't want to linger and, come into the kitchen and, oh, they're in here. I better just, like, oh, I can't scramble my eggs because, I don't want any of that. It's, I still love you. Yeah, you got corrected. I get corrected at times, and we just got to move on. That is actually a mark of maturity. Did you hear me say maturity? Not maturity. Maturity. That's what happens when you're mature. You say mature. Okay? But it's a sign of maturity that when you have a disagreement with someone, even if you agree to disagree, okay, got it, I understand, let's just move on. There's no time for holding on to things, and God is moving on. God doesn't have time to tiptoe around his children and, what's going on, I'm not really sure, are they going to like me, are they not going to like me? He's not concerned with all of that. It's, we've got things to do. And he says the promise of possession remains. And he doesn't stop there. In verse 2, he gives the promise of protection. And I will send my angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite, and the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Termite, and the Jebusite, and the Outosite. He says, listen, you are still going to the land, and there are people there in the land. And God's promise of protection remains. Nothing has changed. You're still going to the promised land. And yes, there are people there, but like I promised you before, God is saying, is I am going to push those people out. I've got a plan. Nothing about that has changed. When I go to watch my kids perform, or, as they were younger, they were playing sports and things, I went to their games not because they loved me. I went to their games because I loved them. Nothing could change that. And they may have been acting like monsters, or they may have been having a bad attitude, or whatever they had, but it did not change my love for them. And God says, yeah, you made an idol and worshipped it. You forgot all about me. But God is saying to his people, but that doesn't change my love for you. Isn't that fantastic news this morning? That you can make all the mistakes that you want, and listen, just to bless your day, you're going to make lots more mistakes. As you continue to grow, as you continue to mature with the Lord, you are going to make lots more mistakes. And what you need to get locked in that puny little brain of yours is God's love for me is not going to change. Now, there may be some lingering consequences of the mistakes that I make, but God's love for me is not going to change, and his promises aren't going to change. And it's wonderful news. It's wonderful news for a people that have just disobeyed in a big way and are wondering, like, what does God think? What's going on? Does God still love me? Does God not love me? Does God want to work? Does he not want to work? This answers those questions for you and I. Those of us that are experts at being disobedient and struggling and stumbling. God's promises do not change. And God promises, I'm going to send my angel before you. And he says in verse 3, now what we're going to see in verse 3 is that there are some lingering consequences to their choice. It says in verse 3, he says, go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, it doesn't mean that there were going to be rivers of milk and rivers of honey. I always picture that old Gene Wilder movie. Some of you may have seen it before. It's called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and they're in the river, and the newer one, what's his name? I can't remember his name. He's okay, but Gene Wilder, the old one, they're on that river full of chocolate. And I always picture like, oh, land flowing with milk and honey. What does that mean, a land flowing with milk and honey? It is a figure of speech, meaning that the land is going to supply all of their needs. Milk comes from what? Stater Brothers, right? It comes from animals. It comes from milk, it comes from goats, it comes from different kinds of animals. And what about honey? Where does honey come from? The bee's knees, right? The bees. I love honey. Just throwing that out there, okay? In case Christmas comes up and you think, hey, I got to get something for Chris. He really loves honey. Go to a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, it means that there would be animals there. There would be bees. And bees, what is it that bees use in order to make honey? What do they make? Pollen, flowers, different kinds of plants that they extract from. Okay? And so what God is indicating to them is, he's not like, okay, I'm still going to let you go to the land, except now It's going to look like a Mad Max movie. There's not going to be anything there. You're going to have to harvest the dirt. He doesn't tell them that. The promise remains. Incredible. He does say this now in verse 3. You're going, yeah, I knew it was too good to be true. No, it's the promise stands. But there will be a consequence to their choice. Notice verse 3, second part. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. And he says, for I will not go up in your midst. What? He says, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. God says, now listen, he indicates some things are going to change. There's going to be a change here. The promises still stand. I still love you. He says, but I need to get out of the midst of you, out of the middle of you. He says, before I consume you on the way because you are so stubborn. He says, listen, I got to get myself out of the mix a little bit. What this is indicating to us, and we'll see it clearly here, plainly in just a moment, is that there is some distance between him and the people. It does not mean that they're no longer his. It doesn't mean any of that. It doesn't mean that the relationship is broken. It means that there's now some distance. And God is indicating to them, look, like when you choose that route, you begin to damage the relationship. It's not broken, but now there's some distance. And we'll see it here in just a moment. But he says the reason why, because you're stubborn people, stiff-necked people. Verse 4, and when the people heard this bad news, they mourned. And no one put on his ornaments. What? They like dressing themselves up like Christmas trees? What were they doing? We'll find out here. For the Lord had said to Moses. Now notice past tense. The Lord had said. So evidently what we see in verse 5, God had already spoken to Moses. And they heard it. And that's why they reacted in verse 4. But notice verse 5, what God had said to Moses. Say to the children of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. I could come up into your midst in one moment and consume you. Now therefore take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do to you. So the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by Mount Horeb. The ornaments, what is that? It means their jewelry, their ornamental jewelry, their ornamental clothing. What God is telling them is you need to humble yourselves. Get rid of all the fancy stuff. Later on in the Old Testament, we will learn about sackcloth and ashes. Some of you may remember that from the famous story, the well-known story of Jonah, when he went in and preached to Nineveh. And the people put on sackcloth and ashes. They put on sackcloth. They changed their clothes, got rid of their fancy clothing to show this outward appearance of humility. It was a way of showing on the outside what was taking place on the inside. And God says, you need to humble yourselves. Get rid of all the fancy stuff. Get rid of it. And so they did that in verse 6. In obedience, they responded well. They stripped themselves of their ornaments by Mount Horeb. So they say, yeah, we really need to take the focus off of what we have on and this kind of lifestyle that we're trying to live, and let's just focus on God. Now, we move into our second main division, which is the temporary tabernacle. Now, because God says, I'm no longer going to be in your midst, okay, because if I stay here, you're so disobedient that I may just consume you. So here's what happens in verse 7. Moses took his tent and pitched it outside the camp. He pitched it outside of the camp. Okay? Moses just so angry at the people, like, let me just get away from them? No. Far from the camp. And called it the tabernacle of meeting. Now we'll stop there for just a moment because some of you are familiar with the term tabernacle. Anybody ever heard that word before? Tabernacle. We spent weeks and weeks on it. Remember that? Learning all about the tabernacle and what God was telling Moses, build the tabernacle this way and do the tabernacle this way and put this furniture in it and they need to wear these clothes and there's all these special instructions. What was the tabernacle? Well, it was a place of meeting. And they didn't have the tabernacle built yet. But God is looking for a place like, I need to get out of the midst of these people. So Moses, you're going to take your tent, you're going to move it far outside the camp, and then I'm going to meet you over there. And I'm going to deal with you, Moses, directly. And that's a beautiful thing too, and we'll get there in just a moment. But what Moses does is he sets up this temporary meeting place here, temporary tabernacle. And it says in verse 7, and it came to pass that everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of meeting, which was outside the camp. And there may be those times in your life and in my life where we feel as if we are distant from God. And oftentimes what will happen is we can feel that we're distant from God, and I've seen this happen over and over and over for years now. That oftentimes when we feel distant from God, that we distance ourselves even more. And then it's like, man, I haven't seen that person at church for a long time, and where have they been? And man, they've not even been around. And then finally you see them. It's like, hey, what happened? Oh, man, I got mixed up in some bad stuff, and I did this, I made some bad choices, and had these troubles going on. It's like, yeah, and? Well, I couldn't come to church, I was just like, I wasn't living right. No, church is the place that you come to when you're not living right. It's a hospital for sick individuals. That's what this is. This isn't, we all look nice and cute and pretty on the outside, but on the inside, all of us are struggling. So this isn't a place for perfect people. This is a place for imperfect people. And what we need to do is get in the habit of, when we are struggling in our relationship with God, is not distance ourselves, but make an effort to get closer to Him. To bring that nasty, gnarly sin to Him. He already knows about it. Is there some sin that you're going to commit that God is, oh my goodness, I can't believe they did that. He's seen it all. The very first family, Adam and Eve, by the way, that He created, they had some kids, Cain and Abel. Don't know if you know the story. Cain killed Abel, his brother. And that was the first family. God's been dealing with sin for a long time. There's nothing that you can surprise Him with. You find yourself struggling, the thing to do is to get as close as you can to Him. Some people, they ride in a truck. You ever been in the back of a truck? Anybody? Illegal. But it's fun, isn't it? And there are always those people in the back of a truck. Lots of times over the years, go to Mexico, take a truck, and in Mexico you can have people in the back of the truck. And there are always those people that want to sit at the tailgate. They're just back there like they're imagining themselves on a motorcycle or something. Like, oh, so cool. Like, wind blowing through your hair. You just felt like, woo. And then there are those people that want to sit as close as they can to the cab. There are always those that want to get as far away from the cab as possible. Give me the most dangerous place. But where you and I want to be as far as our relationship with God is, let me get as close to the cab as I can. That's the safest place for me. And I'm all about not being safe, about being dangerous. Let's do it. But as far as our relationship with God, we want to be in that place of safety. Like, God, I'm a mess. You think God doesn't know? He knows. And here in this episode, Moses moves the tent out, separates himself, because that's where he's going to meet with God. But it says there in verse 7, and it came to pass that everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of meeting. Let me say something. Let me suggest something to you that I didn't share with the first service. So you're getting a little bit of special information right here. Feel privileged. Okay? Notice what it says in verse 7. It does not say that everyone sought the Lord. It says that everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of meeting. No doubt in that camp, God's children, the children of Israel, no doubt there were some who were not concerned. It's like, I'd go meet with God, but it's so far. I'm not going out there. And then there were those who made the effort. Hey, we're going to go meet with God. And they planned it. Let's go. Let's make it happen. There are those who are all about the ease. If it's easy, I'll do it. But if it's going to be strenuous, if it's going to take some effort, if it's going to take some of my time, But there were those in the camp who said, no, I need to meet with God. And they made the effort, and they made the trek, and they went out to the tent of Moses. In verse 8, it says, so it was, whenever, this is incredible, whenever Moses went out to the tabernacle, that all the people rose, and each man stood at his tent door and watched Moses until he had gone into the tabernacle. They're all watching. Oh, there he goes. He's going out to the tent, the temporary tabernacle. Why did they do that? Because in verse 9, there was the presence of God. And it came to pass when Moses entered the tabernacle that the pillar of cloud descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. All the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the tabernacle door. And all the people rose and worshiped, each man in his tent door. So the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. And he would return to the camp. But his servant, watch out, Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tabernacle. So every time Moses went out, the pillar of cloud, God was in the pillar of cloud, and he would descend there to the door of Moses' tent to meet with Moses, and they would talk. Now, I do not know exactly how they talked. It says that they talked face to face as a man talks to his friend. We'll get some clarification here in just a moment, in case you're thinking, what does God look like? Is it true he has a big white beard, or does he look like Santa Claus, or what does it look like? We'll get some clarification here as to what that means. But what you and I need to understand is that God and Moses spoke to one another. Whether it was through a vision, maybe he put Moses to sleep, or I don't really know how he did it. It doesn't indicate that for us. Nevertheless, they would meet there. And the people saw that, and they would worship from inside the camp. It's like, oh, there he goes. And man, look out there. You can see the pillar of cloud. Here comes God. And imagine what that would do. And what God was doing was establishing the leadership and the authority of Moses, indicating to all of the people, there's something different about Moses. Not because Moses is just a really swell guy, but because of God. God made him special. It was the fact that he had a relationship with God that made him different, that made him stand out. But he's establishing the leadership of Moses. Remember Moses? Put in a basket when he was little, and put in the reeds, and they pushed him out into the river and followed him, and he ended up being part of Pharaoh's family for many years. And then one day he went out and he said, I've got to free these people. I've got to free the Israelites from the Egyptians. And he saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite. And he looked over there, and then he looked over there, and he goes, all right, nobody's looking. And he grabbed the Egyptian and killed him, and then buried him in the sand. That was his idea of, man, this is how we're going to fix this problem, this injustice. Remember that? And then he skipped town. He had to leave because Pharaoh found out about it and put a price on Moses' head. Moses had to leave. And Moses ends up in Midian with his father-in-law. He gets married. He's got a father-in-law. He ends up out there shepherding his father-in-law's flock of goats. Moses. And he's perfectly fine with that. He's just out there by himself in the wilderness, the backside of the wilderness. And then God appears to him. But Moses had long since given up. Like, man, there's no hope for the Jews, man. Like, I tried, but nothing I can do. But now, these many years later, he's a leader, and God is establishing his leadership and working in him and working through him and showing the people, no, this is your leader. Pay attention to what he has to say. But we see God's presence here. Now, moving on to our third and final main division, talking with God. It says in verse 12, then Moses said to the Lord, see, you say to me, bring up this people. But you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found grace in my sight. That's what God was saying to him. God was telling him, you're going to lead these people. God was saying to him, I know you by name, and you've found grace in my sight. But what Moses is about to do, he's about to say, hey, but I want to, that's great. You've talked about your plan a little bit. You know me, but I want to know you. And I want you to take note here of the attitude that Moses has with God, because it is beautiful in verse 13. Now, therefore, I pray. What is he doing? He's praying. He's talking to God. He's praying. He says this, if I have found grace in your sight. Now, that's just another way to phrase it, because what Moses actually means, and God knows it too, it's not if I have found favor in your sight, it's since I have found favor in your sight. Notice what Moses asks for. Show me now your way, that I may know you and that I may find grace in your sight, and consider that this nation is your people. Right there, to see that at the end? He's like, and don't forget, God, these are your people, not mine. Throwing them back and forth. But I want you to notice what Moses is requesting from God. Number one, look what he says. He says, show me now your way. Show me now your way. God, I don't want my own vision. Don't give me a vision for Fusion. How about you, God, you've got a vision for Fusion already? Let's just go with your vision. So that when I got here, I knew very little about the youth group. I knew Pastor Brian. We had worked together before in ministry. I knew some of the students. But it wasn't about, God, I'm at Fusion, and I got a plan, and this is how we're going to do Fusion, so bless it, God. It was about me coming and saying, God, you're already working at Fusion. It's not like I'm going to come there and like bring you for the first time. You're already there. So what is it, God, that you're already doing, or what do you want to accomplish? Let me find that out. You see, far too often what will happen with us is we say, God, I've got this plan that, I'm going to graduate from school here, and then I'm going to apply to this college, UCLA, Berkeley, Oxford, whatever your choice of college is, and I'm going to apply, and then I'm going to get into this such and such a program, and I'm going to finish in 4 years, because 5-year students, losers, okay? So 4 years, we're going to finish up, and then once I'm done with that, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start working at the law firm or at the hospital, or I'm going to start doing this thing, and then what I'll do is I'll save up some money at that point, because I'll be getting paid X amount of dollars. I already know. I've already figured it out. Inflation, and 4 years from now, yeah. And then so I'll buy this car that I've always wanted, and once I get my dream car, then what'll happen is I'll get my dream spouse. Somebody really hot, Lord, and loves the Lord, loves you too, God, but somebody really hot. And then after a while, we'll be married, and what we'll do is we'll just be married for a few years. We don't want to have kids right away, God, because kids are. And so we'll just be married for a while, and then after a while, what we'll do is we'll have 2.3 kids, and then after that point, then we'll just live the American dream, and then we'll save up X amount of dollars, and we'll retire in Menifee, and we'll get ourselves a really big RV. And a car to pull behind it, and some bikes that we don't ever use, because we've got great lawn chairs, and we just sit in our lawn chairs every time we go somewhere. And then eventually, we'll die. We'll go to be with you. And God, there's the plan. Go ahead and bless it. But I want you to take note that Moses, the man of God, the one that God is using to lead the children of Israel, is missing something from his prayer. He said the very first thing. He's got God's ear. You can say anything you want to God. You can ask him for anything you want. And Moses totally blows it. He doesn't give God his plan at all. In fact, what he says is this. First request, number one, show me now your way. Moses says to God, I ain't got a way. God, if it weren't for you, I'd be out in the wilderness with a flock of goats, sleeping with them, just out there. So God, why don't you show me your way? Because I don't have a way. My way's not going to work. Show me your plan. Give me your vision. What is it that you want to do? God, if it's not for you, I don't even have a life. I could go to sleep tonight and you could snatch the breath out of my lungs and I'd be done. So how about you tell me what you want? Show me now your way. And then he says this, show me now your way. Give me your vision. Tell me what you want to do. And number 2, that I may know you. I just want to know you. And Moses is in the tent alone with God. Joshua's nearby somewhere. But it's Moses and God said, Moses says, listen, I just want your plan. And then the second thing is, all I want to do is know you. That's all I want. I don't care what happens. I could be a millionaire or I could be homeless, God. I just want to know you. I mean, come on, Moses. This is your chance. This is your chance. Ask for something. Like, Lord, I really, really, God, would you just please give me a Lambo? Please, I'm just praying for a Lambo. That I just want to go to church for your glory, of course, in a Lamborghini, but all for your glory. Or, God, could you just please bless me with a new pair of Jordans? For your glory, of course. But that's really what I want, because I just go really well with my... And he doesn't do any of that. He's got God. He can ask him for anything he wants. And Moses totally blows it. He says, just show me your way, and I want to know you. I just want to know you. And then finally, and that I may find grace in your sight. God, I just need more of your grace. I mean, come on, Moses, seriously? Such small vision. He couldn't just throw in there like, God, could you just please give me also, I want to know you, and I want to grow, and I want to, all that stuff, but could you also give me a winning lottery ticket, God? Could you also just hook me up with like $1 million? I'll use it to, I'll give all my money away. You know how we do that? Like, oh God, if I could just win the lottery. I mean, I would use a bunch of it, to give to people. No, you would not. Come on, just be honest. God, I really want $1 million to spend on myself, right? Just be honest. He doesn't do any of that. He has 3 requests. Show me your way. I'd want to know you, and I want more of your grace. I just want more of your grace. What a beautiful request. This is the heart of a man who once said, I'm just going to kill this Egyptian, and we're going to do it my way, like Frank Sinatra. This is a man who has been radically changed over multiple years. But you and I have the opportunity to look at him, see his mistakes, see the failures, see the successes, and maybe skip some of the hardship and say, God, I want this kind of an attitude. And maybe you're not even there. Maybe that's not your desire at all. Like, you know what? I don't really care if you show me your way, God, or that, to even know you any better, and I don't even necessarily think about more of your grace. But maybe today I know, you know what? I need to be more like this. Then at least pray that. God, help me to be more like Moses in this. That my desires would change. Maybe my desires are elsewhere. But God, I want to know what you want to do, and I want more of you, and I just want more of your grace. There's no selfishness there, no desire to get some great gain, to make some, certain amount of money. He's not asking for fame. He's not asking for success in his own eyes or even in the eyes of the world. This humble man, Moses. So I just want to know more about you, God. I just want you leading. I just want to know you. And I just want more of your grace. What an incredible, incredible desire. And in verse 14, he said, God says this. I mean, it's this exchange. God speaks to him and says, my presence will go with you. The promise of his presence. He had already made a promise of possession. The people will inherit the land. They'll get it. God is saying, my promises haven't changed. There was the promise of protection earlier, where God said, I will protect you from the people that are in the land. He also said, I will protect you from myself. I'm going to move outside the camp, because if I stay here, I might get frustrated and wipe you all out. So he moved himself out. And now we see another promise, the promise of his presence. His presence hasn't left. Verse 15, then he said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here. The attitude of Moses. If you're not in it, I don't want to do it. Plain and simple. If you're not going to go with us, God, then it's just better if we just stay here. If you're not going to go with us, it's better that we not go. I mean, do you feel that way? Or are you like, well, God, you coming? You're not? Okay, well, I'm going to go anyways. I'm just going to do this thing all myself. But Moses here being totally, completely open to God, whatever you want to do, that's what I want to do. Whatever you want to do. This is from a heart of love. You know how people, when they're in love, you ever seen that before? People who are in love and they're just like, well, where do you want to go to eat? Wherever you want to eat. Well, pick a place. I'll pick whatever place you pick. What time do you want to leave? Whatever time you want to leave. Well, where do you want to go? Wherever you want to go. You want to go to the movies? Yeah. What do you want to see? Whatever you want to see. You know what I mean? So in love, it's just like, oh, that's so gross, man. Like, come on, just, make a choice. Driving me crazy. Moses, I just want to go wherever you're going, God. I just want to know you more. That's all I want. I just want more of your grace, more of you, more of your supply. He's so in love with God. So in love with God, so mushy. So the Lord said to Moses, let's go back up to verse 16. For how then will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight, except you go with us? So we shall be separate, your people and I, from all the people who are upon the face of the earth. What is it that separates you and I from the rest of the world? We all like to think that we're unique. The way that we look, we got our own sense of style, our own sense of fashion. You do. Okay? But if all of us were to jump in a bus right now and head over to the mall down the road, we probably would get out and then realize, we all pretty much look the same as everybody else at this mall. There will be differences, but basically we all pretty much look the same. So what is it that sets us apart from everybody else? He just said it right here in verse 16. For how then will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight? Except you got to go with us. So we shall be separate. See, if you're with us, then we'll be separate, your people and I, from all the people who are upon the face of the earth. God, we look like everybody else, but if you'll go with us, if you'll be with us. You see, that's the difference. Is that when you and I have the presence of God in our lives, that's what sets us apart. That's what makes us different. So Moses recognizes that. He's like, it's going to be your presence that will separate the two. So the Lord said in verse 17 to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. I know your name, boy. So finally in verse 18, Moses gets down to the nitty-gritty. And he says, verse 18, please show me your glory. They are going to prepare to meet here. Moses says, show me your glory. Then he said, God speaking in verse 19 said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. I will be gracious to to whom I will be gracious. None of your business. I'll be gracious to whoever I want to be gracious to. And I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. Sometimes we're like, you know what? How could God forgive this murderer in prison? You know, they did such and such. It's none of my business. God can have compassion on whoever he wants. It's his compassion. It's his grace to give. But he said in verse 20, he says, I'll be gracious. I'll have compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. So it gives some clarity to the question that we had about, well, when they're in the tent meeting, like, does God just come in bodily form and they sit there and they just talk? I really don't know. But what I do know is this. There's things that I don't know, so I always fall back on what I do know. What do I know? I know that God says here, look, you can't see my face. If you see my face, you'll die. So you can't see my face. So what did it mean that they talked face to face? I really don't know. They talked. I don't know. But God here says, he makes it clear, you cannot see my face. No man shall see me and live. And the Lord said in verse 21, here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. So your job is to stand on the rock. So it shall be, while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock. Rock of ages, cleft for me. And will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. What a trip. Now we're going to see this take place next time. So they're preparing this meeting. It's very important that Moses, you got to pay attention. Stand on the rocks. I'm going to get you. I'm going to put you in the cleft, in that little crevice down there. I'll cover you up. I'll pass by. It's like God's, like, oh, covering him. And then after he walks by, he takes his hand away, and then Moses can pop out and see the back of God as he's walking away, as he's walking by. And he'll get to see his glory that way. God says, you cannot see me face to face and see, you cannot see all of my glory. You do that, you're a dead man. Can't see that. So we get this sense of awe, this sense of holiness, this sense of privilege that Moses gets to see at least some of the glory of God. This is what we used to refer to, I've not heard it in a long time, but we used to refer to this when we would talk about an afterglow. Anybody ever heard of an afterglow? Anybody? Yeah, okay. Afterglow is something that I remember doing several years ago. It was pretty popular in Calvary chapels and churches, where maybe after service, you would stick around if you wanted to, and they would have worship music, and there would be a time of prayer. Sometimes there would be the exercising of gifts, the speaking of tongues, or maybe it was prophesying. But the idea was, we're just going to stay here, and we're just going to wait on God, and we're just going to see if he wants to do something different, something special. And that was called, we used to call those afterglows. Some of you have been here for, when we do linger, once in a while we'll do linger here. And that's about as close as we come to that. But that's where we get it from. That's where we got that term from, was this episode here where God says, okay, I'm going to show you some of my glory, but you can't see all of it. I'm going to reveal all of it. But God responding to the request of Moses. May your heart and my heart say, you know what, God, I just want more of your glory. I don't want my own glory. I just want more of your glory. Show me more of you, God. Just reveal more of yourself to me. So, Father, help us.